I would just like to introduce you to the monitors that they currently have on the undocumented mothers. This is the monitors that they're keeping track of them. This instead of having them detained in the prisons, they're keeping a monitor on their ankles, and they have to check in periodically. She was mentioning a moment in which it starts beeping, and she actually has to connect to an outlet for 2 to 3 hours, standing there with her leg, in order to check in to ICE.
Hello everybody, my name is Diana. I'm a member of the John Jay Dreamers. I'm also working alongside the nonprofit La Fuente to host this event. We also like to welcome La Voz and the Democratic Club for helping us coordinate this event. So I would like to begin by introducing one of our members from the New Sanctuary Movement who we're working alongside. They work with the unaccompanied minors, they work in advocacy. So please give a round of applause to Kyle Barron. Hello, thank you so much for inviting her in New York City. And we provide social and legal support for immigrants in New York. We do have clinics for legal support where we bring together lawyers from various organizations to provide legal support. We've been working a lot with the Garifuna community here in the Bronx. And aside from that, we also do a lot of larger political advocacy because there's a lot to be done that's not just about people's individual cases. And so we sort of try to take a long-term view and see what we can do as an organization to change a lot of the really unjust laws that are going on and just people's minds in general about what's happening in immigrant communities here. And so one of the most important work that we do is the accompaniment program, where we have volunteers from a lot of the churches that we work with, and we pair them with immigrants going through the deportation process. Because a lot of people, you don't even want lawyers at the beginning of the process, or you just can't access lawyers. And so many people are having to go to these appointments at the federal building here in Manhattan all by themselves. And it's a really confusing process. It's intimidating. And I think a lot of that is by design, is how the whole immigration system is set up here. And so I think the work is really important because you can sort of be an interface between the government and ICE and the people going through this terrible process. What's really important, I think, I have an example. We were working last week with some people, and a woman had a court date, and you have to turn in your papers to the clerk, and no one tells you you have to do that, and they just assume everyone knows how to do that. But she had turned in her papers, and they went and called everyone's name, and we were still sitting there at the end of the day, and the judge said, "Who are you?" And said, "You know, you have to turn in your papers," and we said we did. We turned them into the local clerk, and they had actually printed out an in absentia order, and so that would have led to deportation for sure. And so we were able to get them to rescind that order, and they were able to have their hearing after that. So it's also really important for ISAP because a lot of these women have ankle monitors, so the clientes that called an alternative to detention, but a lot of us know that that's not an alternative. It's completely, lack of movement. People can't just live their normal lives with these ankle monitors that they have to charge for hours a day. And so a lot of times people don't know that they can go to the ISAP office after their hearings, and sometimes they'll take those off. So that's important too because it's really hard to navigate just where that office is. So I think this work is really important to get to know people who are going through this process and also advocate on a larger level. So we were in desperate need of volunteers. We had 3 hearings yesterday, 2 today, 3 tomorrow, and 1 more on Friday, and that's been a typical week lately. And so it's really important to pair these people with someone that can really understand and guide them through this process. So I'm going to hand out flyers after this event, so if anyone's interested, we'd really love to have you, especially Spanish speakers. It's really critical. So we do have a lot of people from the faith community who are helping out, but it's important to be able to just even have a nice conversation there at Federal Plaza while they're waiting for their hearings. So now I'm going to introduce Juan Carlos Ruiz. He's from the Episcopal Church, and he's going to kind of put some of this in context for us as we introduce the women here today.
loudly.
It's good to be here. Is that? People talk about the immigration system as a broken system. And I have to say that's a misnomer. It is a design system that since the 1995, 96, after the terrorist attack in Oklahoma, it shifted. And it finally got fueled with injection of hormones in September 11, 2001. Everything became framed under the terrorist eyes, or I should say under this terrorist alarm. So we have to really take into consideration that the framework that we are working from needs to be changed. It's not just the law, okay? It's the way we perceive people. Basically, how the law frames people right now is people are a threat to our security. People, immigrants, mostly people of color, are a threat to our peace, to the law of the land. Okay? And that's basically the platform that we need to work from. Okay? That we need to work in terms of changing it, that our advocacy and our struggling with the different communities of color here in our country, that has to take into consideration that kind of frame, that perspective, and how can we, as communities concerned with the people that are coming to our land, how can we join efforts and really change those lenses whereby we see each other. Am I loud enough? Because I have the...
He's going to try to fix it. Keep talking.
Under this... Oh, that's excellent. Whew.
Hang on a second, okay?
Let me give you an assignment as they do this. I invite you to close your eyes. Just give me 30 seconds. Close your eyes and think of a human being. Any kind of human person that you know. Just think of that person. How she or he dresses. How she or he looks like. And now think of an immigrant. How he or she dresses, how she or he looks like. Now you can open your eyes. I don't want you to fall asleep. What's the difference? Is there any noticeable difference? And you know, we are going to find out that most of them look just like us most of the time. So how can we allow laws to discriminate, to unjustly separate families? You know, the title of this conversation is Women, Mothers, Trapped in Limbo. And I think limbo is a misnomer also. Limbo, supposedly in the religious parlance, it has to end. It has a time that begins and it has a time that ends. When we talk about the immigration law, there is not a timetable here. People are caught in this system, and we talk and we speak about these people being trapped in an endless cycle of time. For many people, there is no that hope that they will be able to regularize their status. Okay? With the Garifuna women that we've been working with, and we have 3 friends here with us, there is this sense that even the executive order of Obama on the 20th, which hasn't been implemented and which we don't know that many details, but we have the inkling that that's not going to protect them at all. Okay? So, what kind of protections we as a community can offer to the recent ones that are arriving at our shores? You know? It is a question, first of all, about community. What kind of community do we want to be? What kind of a nation do we want to be? Okay? We've been working with about 160 women, more or less, at this particular church. We know that the crisis is not just a humane crisis, but it's a refugee crisis. People are fleeing violence, either by the state or by transnationals that are taking over their land. With our friends, particularly, there is the grabbing of land by the multinationals, either by mining companies or by tourist businesses. Given that they are Garifunas, they have lived in the land, in their ancestral land, for centuries, okay? And this is the best prime real estate, okay? So people, specifically the government, they want to have their hands in that land, okay? So implicitly, we know that this struggle is about grabbing that land, defending that land. The Garifuna community has distinguished itself because they've been in resistance with these forces that they want to take over. Okay? So many of the community have been pushed out indirectly or directly from their land. They have been pushed out of their communities and they have left to the city. And then the city is kind of a midpoint on their way to the north. Okay? The government, and we still do not know how this happened, but the government back just about in May last year, they began kind of this misinformation campaign that they were telling the people that basically that they can come to the States and that they were going to be welcome. Under that deception, they got here. And I don't want to take more time. I think we have some limited time. I want you to hear their stories. And then we go from there. Okay? Who's going to speak first? Berlin or Griselda or who is going to do that?
Aquí tenés el micrófono.
Ah, aquí tengo el micrófono. Ok. Bueno, buenos días o buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Berlin Janet Norales, hondureña, madre soltera de 4 niños. Me vine de mi país porque no hay oportunidades. no hay fuentes de trabajo, la inseguridad. La verdad que en Honduras no se puede vivir ya. Entonces me vine escapando de la violencia. Yo vivía en San Pedro Sula y tenía un negocio de comida y de ahí podía solventarme y poder sobrevivir con mis niños. Y en varias ocasiones fui asaltada en mi negocio y yo llamaba a la policía y la policía llegaba después. Y en tercera ocasión, un muchacho de la esquina del negocio de la casa vendían lotería, habían asaltado ahí, habían herido a uno de ellos y quiso refugiarse adentro de mi negocio donde estaban la gente comiendo y ahí murió y de ahí lo levantó la policía. Entonces después llegaron unos hombres a preguntarme, a presionarme, de querer saber si yo había visto quién le había disparado al muchacho que había muerto en el negocio. Entonces, poco fuera eso, me empezaron a extorsionar, a cobrarme dinero por el negocio, por tenerlo abierto, por trabajar. Me empezaron a extorsionar, entonces decidí mejor cerrar el negocio y buscar nuevos horizontes y una nueva vida con mis hijos. Entonces me vine y mi llegada aquí a este país pues no ha sido tan bienvenida como me lo habían dicho y más el sufrimiento que tuve en el camino. Pasé por Guatemala, pasé por México. En México, cuando veníamos, nos subimos al tren llamado La Bestia con mis niños. Una noche que nosotros veníamos en el tren, éramos como 8 mujeres, con madres con sus niños. Se subió un hombre y empezó a cobrarnos, a decirnos que si no pagábamos nos iban a tirar del tren. Entonces, como pudimos entre todas, nos empezamos a tirar del tren. Después nos reunimos todas y nos refugiamos en una casa abandonada que estaba en el monte. Estuvimos 3 días ahí, con los niños sin comer, estaba lloviendo. Pero la valentía y el esfuerzo y el querer mejorarnos, entre todas nos dábamos ánimos. Y como al 4.º día salimos de ahí, volvimos a coger otro tren y llegamos a Coaxa, estuvimos en Coaxa y también vimos cómo encima del tren un hombre tiró al otro y nosotros vimos cómo se murió ese señor, que un muchacho había tirado del tren porque dice que no había pagado el impuesto de guerra que cobran en el tren por México. Llegamos a la frontera, cruzamos el río Bravo con los niños una madrugada, como a las 2 de la mañana, nos metimos al río con nuestros hijos. Yo con mis 2 niños, yo traía una en la espalda y el otro niño en brazos y yo los agarraba bien fuerte, a modo de que no se me llegaran a soltar porque yo no me imaginaba lo que iba a pasar. Cuando estábamos en medio del río, unas compañeras empezaron a llorar y mi niña me decía, mami, no me vayas a soltar, mami, no me vayas a soltar. No, no te preocupes, no te voy a soltar, le decía yo. Cruzamos al otro lado. Cuando llegamos, unas compañeras nos ayudaron y nos empezaron a sacar del agua, las que ya habían salido a flote. Al otro lado nos empezaron a llamar y nos tiraron un palo para que nos agarráramos de ahí y llegáramos al otro lado. Y así cruzamos el río Bravo. Cuando cruzamos al otro lado estaba la patrulla fronteriza. Nos detuvieron, nos dijeron que si habíamos venido con alguien. Le dijimos que no, que habíamos venido un grupo de mujeres, de madres nada más. Entonces nos llevaron a un como precinto. Ahí nos tuvieron como 3 días. Y allá tampoco el trato no fue muy bueno porque cuando queríamos algo nos decían que por qué nos habíamos venido de nuestro país, que si no nos daba miedo haber cruzado el río así. Le decíamos que por la necesidad y el querer salir adelante. Ahí nos tuvieron 3 días, nos daban de comer unas como burritas, pero no nos daban agua y las burritas nos las daban heladas. Incluso mi niño se me enfermó del estómago porque llegaba la hora de comer y yo no sabía qué darle a mi niño. Y después me dijeron que tenía que firmar un montón de papeles. Entonces yo le dije qué eran esos papeles. Me dijeron que si yo no los firmaba, yo no iba a salir de ahí. Y mis niños ya estaban desesperados porque ya eran 3 días sin ver la luz del sol. Y los niños se desesperan. Entonces firmé y me soltaron. Y desde Texas me vine en bus hasta llegar acá a Nueva York porque aquí me esperaba mi papá y mi familia. Y me dieron una hoja donde venía el nombre de mis hijos. Y cuando me dijeron que tenía que ir a corte y que tenía que presentarme, que era obligatorio. Cuando yo llegué acá le dije a mi papá que este papel era el que me habían dado allá en inmigración. Mi papá me dijo que era un papel que podía ser arrestada, pero también podía ser deportada. Entonces que era muy importante que fuera a corte. Llegó la fecha, fui a corte. Cuando yo fui a ese edificio, no, amor. Cuando llegué allá, nos encerraron en un cuarto, nos trasladaron de un edificio al otro, pero por la parte de atrás. No entendíamos nada porque como éramos nuevas acá, cuando llegamos nos encerraron en un cuarto, nos pusieron un video que teníamos que ver y nos dijeron que íbamos a hacer. Nos iban a poner unos brazaletes para una comparecencia y que lo íbamos a aportar por no sé tiempo indefinido. Eso fue lo que nos dijeron. Entonces empezamos a ver el video, vimos el video, después nos llamaban una por una y cada madre que salía con sus niños venía llorando. Yo decía, ¿qué es lo que está pasando? Entonces cuando ellas me mostraban el pie, ellos andaban un brazalete como este que ando yo ahorita. Yo ando un brazalete que, según tengo entendido, aquí en este país se lo ponen a las personas que son criminales. Entonces, cuando me lo pusieron, mi niña me dijo, mami, ¿por qué te ponen eso? Entonces yo le dije, no sé, mami. Se supone que me lo van a retirar. Entonces, cuando llegué a la casa, este brazalete empezó a pitar y a pitar y a pitar. Entonces, yo no sabía qué hacer. Yo llamé allá y me dijeron que le tenía que apretar un botón. Yo le apreté el botón y después empezaba a pitar y a pitar. Me dijeron que tenía que cargarlo. Me dieron un cable para cargarlo. Y me lo puse a cargar y dejó de pitar. Pero a veces en la noche, cuando estoy dormida, a veces el brazalete ese empezaba a pitar y eso estorbaba. Y no podíamos andar en la calle así con eso porque la gente nos miraban así bien diferente a las demás. Entonces, cuando volví a ir allá a la compañía esa, que se supone que es AISA se llama la compañía, volví a ir, les dije que la gente en la calle me quedaban viendo raro con eso, que hasta me habían dicho que si yo era criminal. Entonces me dijeron que no, que por qué me preocupaba por andar un pedazo de hule, así me dijo un oficial de migración. Entonces yo le dije a él, lo que pasa es que como usted no es el que lo anda, ni es usted el que lo están viendo raro, entonces por eso me dice eso. Pero me dijo, no, tú tienes que andar eso porque tú no eres de este país. Eso fue lo que me dijo el oficial de migración. Y todavía lo ando. Hay varias madres con el mismo brazalete, algunas se lo han retirado y a otras no. Esperando a que nos llamen para que nos lo retiren ya, para poder vivir, tener una vida normal, porque con ese brazalete uno no puede vivir bien, no se siente bien uno. Estoy como traumada, no sé, no me puedo poner ropa que se me mire, porque me parece que todo el mundo me mira así bien raro. Y esa ha sido la historia de varias madres garífunas que vinimos de nuestro país. Porque en nuestro país, en Honduras, hay un problema que, con referencia a lo político, lo económico, lo social, no se puede vivir la verdad ya en Honduras. Esa ha sido mi pequeña historia y quise compartirla con todos. Y muchas gracias por escucharme. Espérate, vení.
¿Vos seguís, Gabriela? ¿Viste, no? Seguí. Hija, no pierdas tiempo. Apurate, Gabriela. Yo voy a la vuelta.
podemos empezar a preguntar las preguntas si quieren.
Mejor preguntar.
Okay. Okay, so now we're going to have a short Q&A with the mothers. Two of them were kind of still feeling the effects of their stories, so we're just going to go straight to the Q&A. So una pregunta que les quería preguntar. Para usted, Berlín, ¿cuáles son las limitaciones que le pone el hecho que usted tiene el brazalete?
Las limitaciones que tengo con el brazalete, que no puedo trabajar. No puedo trabajar, no puedo salir del estado. Y imagínese con 2 niños y en una casa que tal vez no me miran bien, porque tengo meses de estar en una casa donde no trabajo y se come los 3 tiempos y con 2 niños. Entonces es un poco incómodo andar con el brazalete. Son los límites, las limitaciones que me han dado, que me ha dado el andar con el brazalete.
Esta pregunta es para Gaby y para Sari. ¿Cuáles fueron las condiciones en que estaban viviendo ustedes que le causó a ustedes tomar la decisión para venirse aquí a los Estados Unidos?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Saraí. Yo me vine de Honduras para los Estados Unidos porque donde yo vivía la delincuencia ya estaba muy fea, se metieron a mi casa a robar y solo mi hija y yo vivíamos ahí y me daba miedo, ya por eso yo me vine acá porque aquí está mi mamá.
Bueno, buenas tardes, mi nombre es Gaby. Yo decidí venirme para acá con mi hijo porque a mí me amenazaron de que me iban a matar. Me amenazaron y cuando a mí me amenazaron, mi hijo escuchó y lo mejor que yo decidí venirme para acá porque si me quedo allá me iban a matar, ya me lo habían dicho. Y entonces por eso decidí venirme para acá.
Estas preguntas para Berlín. ¿Usted ha tenido una conversación con sus hijos explicando la situación en que están ellos? Como el hecho por qué usted tiene el brazalete. ¿Ha tenido alguna discusión sobre eso?
Con mis niños sí, a veces hablamos porque mi niña ya está un poco mayor y ella a veces me pregunta, mami, ¿cuándo te van a quitar el brazalete? ¿Por qué lo andas? Entonces yo le digo a ella, no, se supone que estoy bajo una comparecencia, le digo ya a la niña y me dice, pero mami, pero tú no eres una ladrona, así me dice la niña a veces, mami, tú no eres una ladrona para que te pongan eso, me dice. Y le digo yo, no, mami, yo sé que no, pero para ellos, que yo no soy de este país, para ellos me miran como criminal, pero como le dije yo aquel día al oficial de migración, mi único pecado fue entrar ilegalmente a este país.
Now we have open discussion. Does anybody have a question for the mother? Yeah. You can come if you want that. You can say it out loud and I'll repeat it. The mic. Okay.
Buenas tardes y disculpe porque llegué un poquito tarde. Yo quería escuchar el principio de la historia y por qué te pusieron el brazalete, cuándo fue, cuando llegaron y hasta cuándo es que te tiene que estar con él. ¿Cuándo fue que te lo pusieron y hasta cuándo lo vas a quitar?
Ok, el brazalete me lo pusieron el 8 de agosto y se supone que la comparecencia era de 90 días y ya ahorita el 8 de diciembre cumplí 4 meses de andarlo y yo le llamo y me dicen que mi oficial de migración no está aquí.
Y te lo pusieron cuando tú entrabas, ¿verdad?
No, me lo pusieron después que llegué acá y me tocó ir a corte.
Gracias.
Ok.
Buenas tardes. ¿Y por qué es que a usted le pusieron ese brazalete y a otras personas no se lo ponen? ¿Usted no tiene idea de por qué ese tipo de tratamiento hacia su persona?
Exactamente, había pensado lo mismo que usted, porque hace poco fui a Foran a firmar en la oficina de AISA. Me encontré con que hay varias compañeras blancas que no lo andan, simplemente se lo han puesto. Yo vi como que es un racismo hacia nosotras las madres garífunas y hacia la comunidad garífuna, porque varias madres garífunas fue que nos los colocaron, a otras personas no.
Muchas gracias.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Camila, soy colombiana. Solamente les quiero agradecer por estar acá y compartir la historia con nosotros.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Does anybody else have a question? Okay. So now our final question is for Juan Carlos and Kyle, but it's also directed to you, members. What are ways that as students or as citizens or residents of this country that we can advocate and we can help these women?
How many of you knew that this was happening? Okay, information is our best tool. Not that many people. I think this information stays within our communities, and we need to take it beyond our communities. There are people who do not have the idea, the amount of discretion that the immigration authorities have over people. Okay? They do not need to be, limited and treated so badly. This is supposed to be an alternative to detention, to going into jail, but what it has done to them psychologically is warfare. Practically, it's kind of a torture for them. In terms of explaining to their family, to their friends, why they have to wear those bracelets, the uncertainty of the time, and more so the uncertainty of what's going to ultimately happen to them. Okay? They are in two different legal tracks. The children are on a legal track, and the mothers, the adults, are on a different legal track. Okay? So we do not know what's going to happen at this point. So the question in terms of what can you do, first of all, we need to make visible that this is happening in our communities. Okay? Forums like this are important and relevant. We need to come out of the streets into our institutions and basically tell our stories. So we thank you for allowing us to come into this place. Okay? I think it's necessary. The second, in a more concrete way, talk to Kyle, sign up. We go with them. We help them navigate the system, which is really confusing, even for us. So, but having somebody who speaks the language, okay, having somebody there as a presence, a known, friendly presence, that helps tremendously. Okay, they have to be checking in at least once a month. So we need people, we need bodies to come with them. Okay? Speak to your friends, speak to citizens about what's happening. I mean, this is money that is going into private companies. ISAP is a private company which is kind of the daughter of this jail private corporations of America. I think that's what it's called. That's what it's called, Corporation of America. I don't know. I think they run basically, Incarceration Corporation of America. They basically run the jails, like 90% of the jails in this country, private jails. As it is privatized, they don't have to give an account, or they don't have any kind of transparency. In the last 10 years, we have had over 100 people dying in those jails. and they don't account anything. They don't have to give any account to anybody. Okay, there is no any overseeing. So we need to change that. Okay, is that it, Kyle? Or is that okay? Or
And I think about on the theme of advocacy, I got my master's in political science at NYU, and I'm hopefully entering a PhD program next year in political science. And it's interesting to actually look at, what works in advocacy and what really can change policy, especially when it comes to immigration policy, because a lot of these, like Juan Carlos was saying, it's discretion, and a lot of it is, like the executive order. Things like temporary protected status with TPS, those things really make a difference. And like Hondurans do have TPS, but only if they arrived before 1999. And what really changes those policies is advocacy and bringing saliency to these issues. It's really important, and it really does work. It's documented. And I think so that's really important. And I think part of that is becoming part of these communities. And I think a way to do that is with the accompaniment, because it's not like it's just clinical and you just go and help with, turning in papers. A big part of it is just making small talk and hanging out with the children. And I'm really getting good at coloring and things like that, because when you really start to know people and you can really feel part of the community, it makes a difference, and that fight becomes, more of your fight as well. And I think if anyone can help, we need help tomorrow even, if anybody would like to sign up for the accompaniment program, because especially as students, I know you can have a little bit more flexibility in your schedule, which is really hard for a lot of people, and because most of the appointments are at 9 or then at 1 p.m. So it'd be really, really wonderful if any of you could sign up for our program. So I have flyers here, and thank you all. And gracias a ustedes para hablar y compartir sus historias. Y thank you all for coming so much.
just one last comment, and I think a lot of energy is on the streets on this. This is the state violence. This is a government, not only the government of Honduras, doing this to its people, allowing this to happen, but this is just across. And I mean, we don't have to go that far to feel outrage. What's happening in our streets with Ferguson, with Staten Island, that's state violence, cooked and US made, okay? So now multiply that over 20,000 times more. And in our homelands, in our home countries, that's what's happening. Our foreign policy, there is a direct link of our policies that we implement abroad and what we export as, you know, with the weapons, that is really affecting our communities, okay? We talk about the Colombianization. Because of Colombia, this happened in Colombia 50 years ago. Now it's happening in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, and lately in Mexico, okay? With the disappearance and the killings by the state. It's fueled by US dollars, okay? So we do really need to take a stand in terms of that. This is state-sponsored violence that is driving out our people from their villages, from their towns, okay? So we have different campaigns. Stop the Plan Mexico, stop funding the military in Mexico. We have events throughout the city with the Ayotzinapa New York Coalition and some other coalitions. Thursday, tomorrow, in St. Peter's Church, we have an event for the disappeared and those killed by police brutality from 6 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the morning. There is going to be dancing, music, food, beginning at 6 o'clock. That's on 54 and Lexington. So come and join us anytime. Come and eat. And if you cannot stay there, just come and eat good tostadas, pozole, and the good stuff. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Y gracias a ustedes.
So, on behalf of the John Jay Dreamers, Levels, the Democratic Club, and La Fuente, I thank you all for coming, and can we give another round of applause for our 3 women who were. And little Enrique told me to tell everybody that he says hi. All right, thank you.